Thanks for joining us today. You know, we've got this incredible new program called Art Out and About. It's produced by Governor State University, and it is going to be fabulous. It's going to, we're going to consider things like art galleries and exhibitions. We're going to consider things like artists, theatrical productions. We're going to talk to dancers. We're going to talk to musicians. We're going to talk to artists, painters, sculptors. We're going to highlight all of the creativity that is occurring throughout the far south suburban region of the Chicagoland area. Why? Because we know it's important and we know you're interested in it. So why don't you jump on board, join us as we explore art out and about. Welcome to Art Out and About. My name is Geoffrey Bates. I'm Director and Curator of the Nathan Manilow Sculpture Park at Governor State University. Today we have a wonderful opportunity to explore an exhibition being held at Tallgrass Arts Association in Park Forest. Americana, folk art, objects from private collections, will be on view from October 1st through November 28th. We have today with us Dr. Arthur Bourgeois, who is the Professor of Art History at Governor State University and also one of the curators for the exhibition. Arthur, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
Well, you know, I thought what we would do is we would just jump right into this exhibition and give folks a little flavor of what they might have an opportunity to view when they come to see it. You know, we've been, and we will talk about a variety of different objects from the home in this exhibition. There is the butter churn, and we will probably talk about pie crimpers, and there's a lovely little spongeware bowl and a thread holding box. You know, actually, I had a friend in high school whose father was a carpenter, and he collected antique wood planes, and they were antique wood planes. You know, so where's the art? What's the point of this? Why is this object or these objects in this gallery?
Well, there's two of them. There's two of them together.
Okay.
One is from Northern Ohio, out of Jane Hudek's collection.
Okay.
And the other one that I collected up in French Canada.
Right.
And they're not just ordinary planes. They're for making pictures, and rather frames for for
So you can
pictures.
see there's a conceptual connection there between that and art, I suppose.
But the point is that they're two objects that with a very, very fine patination. They obviously had been used for probably the lifetime of a frame maker.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, but I mean, any tool is used. If I bring a Stanley tool in and put it on a pedestal, is that going to make it folk art?
It's handmade, probably made for the job.
Okay, sure,
right?
You're right.
And
probably made by the person who was using it, I'm guessing.
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
But the point is, the two of them are placed together on the pedestal, and like found objects.
Oh, okay.
And it's like Marcel Duchamp did with his bicycle wheel or shovel or something like that. In other words, we're asking the viewer to see it with a new eye.
Yeah, yeah.
To see it, a domestic object, in a new way.
In a new perspective. Well, I can kind of buy into that. I mean, you know, as you were saying, Marcel Duchamp, he did the piece, it's simply a snow shovel that's standing against the wall, but the title of it is In Anticipation of the Broken Arm, which I've always found was wonderfully poetic.
Clever.
You can imagine it happening, right?
Yeah,
so you're just bringing a new sensibility to how we're looking at this object.
But many of the objects in the folk art exhibition were kind of arranged like still lifes.
Oh, okay.
In other words, the objects have interesting form, shape.
So there's an interactive quality between the objects themselves.
That's right, and such as the stoneware jugs, for example, that are just covered with a Albany slip, rather brown. But the three of them placed together like that is like a still life in
itself. Almost
itself.
like a Giorgio Morandi.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, okay, fabulous, fabulous. Well, you know, there are a variety of different objects. We have some wooden objects, we have some sculpture, some painting. Let's take a look at the, and pardon my French, as they say, but the caverne en bouteille.
Right.
And you please pronounce it correctly.
Exactly.
What is this? It looks like it's very, very miniature and very, very small.
It's shown in the collection along with a number of other devotional objects, especially coming from French-speaking and Spanish-speaking areas of the United States and Canada and obviously the Southwest and Mexico. So, one sense, grouping them together was a little bit, I mean, certainly it's established as a category of folk art in the major collections that have been shown.
Oh, clearly.
But it's a little different in the sense that well, there's some surprises. The Calvarum Bouteille, which simply means a cavalry scene in a bottle.
So it was made in a bottle
It was
originally.
made inside of a wine bottle, like a ship in the bottle.
Okay.
A kind of something that you might expect coming out of New England, you know, sailors and whalers and this kind of thing.
Exactly.
But this was coming from the Gaspé area of Canada, you know, up in Quebec province.
Right.
And so actually I did buy it locally. This item, this object I did purchase in Crete, and the Crete Antique Fair.
You never know what you're going to find.
Right. Well, that was exactly it. I was there with my wife, and we were looking through objects, and I saw this on the table, and immediately I recognized it. I had seen these things illustrated before. And the dealer was not really aware of what she had. And I says, "Oh, where did this come from?" rather. And she says, "Oh, well, my sister runs an antique shop in northern Maine."
In northern Maine,
Right.
okay, there
And
we
she
go.
says
So that's up there
right,
near
that was a
Canada.
good clue of
Sure.
where it was coming from. And so, in fact, I was tempted at the very beginning to kind of, no, I did not remove it from its bottle. Apparently the bottle had broken somewhere in its history. But as a nice little sculpture, this
it's
is...
fabulous. And you have all the different elements of the crucifixion here.
Well, it even has a theme, because that theme of showing the cross with a ladder and sponges and nails and crown of thorns is called something like, the word for it is Arma Christi, which means to say the heraldry of Christ, or the arms of Christ.
Okay.
And so it's a kind of just a category of religious imagery.
Yeah, and I don't know if our viewers realize how small this is. I mean,
we're just talking about this.
The total size is only about like that. I mean, I looked at it when I visited the gallery, and the sponge is just like a little. It's you know
just tied on.
Oh, it's very very tight. It's wonderful though. I mean, it you know has all of the elements of the
I was
Passion.
tempted to almost restore it, to take a bottle and to cut out the bottom and use it as a bell, like a bell jar over it. But when we put it up and displayed it with the others, it simply looked best just as it is.
Well, I think it works very nicely. Well, from the sort of sublime to a little bit more earthy, so to speak, we have these wonderful lures, fishing lures and decoys.
Right.
And I know that you're from northern Michigan.
That's right.
And so
Upper
I'm sure
Peninsula.
you've had some experience with ice fishing.
With ice fishing, certainly.
Tell us about the lures and
Well,
you know, not only clearly they're functional, but tell us a little bit about their aesthetic appeal as well.
Well, the lures are not specifically within my own experience, but certainly ice fishing was as a child with my father and my uncles. So, but this whole notion of having, its origin was Native American, where they would, on the ice, put some kind of a hood over their head or something, and then having made a hole in the ice, in other words, attempt to spear fish. And the idea is to lure them to the hole so this large trident-like spear, you know, would be effective. And of course, it would have a long cord on it, so you wouldn't lose it.
Well, that's always helpful.
And there was a spear right next to the lures, if you recall. Right, there is one in the display.
Yes.
And so it's weighted. It's a little wooden fish with tin type of fins and tail on most examples, but the eyes being sometimes made fairly realistically. And there would be a special little jigging pole. In other words, a pole about this long, sometimes somewhat shapely. In fact, I have one that we could have put in the exhibit, where you wrap the string around the base of the wooden pole itself. Well, anyway, you're jiggling the fish, and it's weighted on the bottom with lead, so it won't float on the surface.
It kind of floats correctly.
Right, it floats correctly, and you just swim it around the hole, waiting for the pike or the sturgeon to emerge, and then zap it with your spear. Right.
That's fabulous.
So
And they're painted all different ways, and this would have been strictly up to the artist, not the artist, but the fisher person, the fishing person. They would be the person who would sort of design these. And do you know offhand, are there lures that are more sought after than others by particular lure makers, or is it so anonymous that it's simply,
I think it's anonymous, really. I think it's, to some degree, it's sort of like people who are selling other fishing flies and whatnot.
Okay,
So there's an aesthetic, I suppose, among fishermen, just what looks good and then what works.
Well, that's an important component.
Right. And so, but there are some makers of lure makers like this who have quite a reputation, and some of their lures today sell for thousands of dollars.
Oh, okay.
So, but my experience was more with tip-ups than lures.
And
that
what
is
are
to
those?
say, it's a little contraption you put above the ice.
Okay.
You have the bait, and it's down below in the water.
Oh, and that's the thing.
And soon as it's hit by the fish, the flag jumps up, and you run like crazy out then to the tip-up and unhook it.
And make sure you don't fall in the process.
Well, yes. Well, usually the ice is several feet thick, but no, that's the successor to that.
Indeed.
And there's a number of restrictions too on ice spearing too.
Oh, I can imagine. You want to be careful who you're fishing with.
Now,
in
of course,
that case.
there's the duck decoys too, and we
Sure.
have that together, and we only have the one decoy in the exhibit.
And those are very well collected these days.
Yes. But again, it has its own, shall we say, folklore, because usually it's not just one. You're operating with maybe a dozen to 20 of them.
Okay.
And the hunter would put them up, in a kind of a U shape or something like that, floating in fairly shallow water, and be behind the scenes in a duck blind, waiting for the ducks to descend, and sometimes using a kind of a horn to do it, and perhaps having dogs too to retrieve the ducks. So it's
so if you were looking at if you were interested in duck decoys, what sorts of things would you be looking for beyond perhaps age in terms of okay, this is a duck decoy that is particularly attractive in some manner. Is it the carving? Is it the painting, or a combination?
It's a
of all?
combination,
Okay.
certainly. And again, that's as you mentioned, they're highly sought after by collectors, and it gets into thousands of dollars of something that was made by someone in the 20s and 30s of this, of the past century, and especially if it's very, very well carved.
Yeah.
Now today, of course, they'll make some that are never intended for the water.
Exactly.
That are simply shelf pieces,
Yeah.
but done exquisitely with some kind of burning and painting and
And all the feathers and everything.
yes, every
exactly.
detail.
Now, I wanted to take a look at this sort of, it's almost like a tree. In fact, I think it's called a Nativity Tree.
Right.
And that's from Wisconsin. You were saying earlier that it's a fellow named Albert Zahn,
That's
is that
correct. Right. Albert Zahn from Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin.
Now, he was a personality, I guess you might call him that.
Yes, in fact, he was just given to making birds and angels, anything with wings.
Okay.
And so this is an interesting kind of, it's more than a collage, I suppose, an extended configuration on wires and dowels, and basically a creche. It's a Christmas creche.
Okay.
But he was known to do all sorts of bird-like things. In fact, even his home was for many years was a stopping place in Bailey's Harbor. Because he had all these winged creatures kind of all over the lawn and all over the house and the fence and whatnot.
Kind of like a Northwoods Howard Finster sort of thing, where you have the whole, his entire house became an environment for his creativity.
Right. And very much a match with the Piacenza piece, which is basically a birdhouse in the form of cathedrals.
Oh, exactly.
So you get that kind of thing of
And that's
just
a lovely piece in
creations.
and of itself.
It's fairly rough, though.
Yeah.
In other words, it's not exquisitely carved.
No.
And I suppose there is even an aesthetic within folk art, allowing for a kind of a rough finish rather than something that's very exquisite.
Right. Well, because for something like the Piacenza, that piece was clearly, it was made to function as a birdhouse. That's primary. It wasn't primarily made to be decorative.
It's not a living room piece.
But as being a human being, fellow had to embellish it in some way, you know, not just straight house, we got to make it into a cathedral or this or that or the other. Wonderful.
Well, some of his were domed affairs, and actually,
really?
yes, getting pictures out of books and replicating them as birdhouses.
Oh, wonderful.
So it was
architectural historian.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
That's
right.
great. Now, one of the things that our viewers are probably most familiar with in terms of, you know, their interaction with folk art would be quilts. And we all have heard the stories about the idea that, you know, there are quilts that, you know, grandmother made out of the scraps. We have in the exhibition a double ring quilt. Right. And what can you tell us about that?
Well, this comes from my wife's family.
Oh, okay.
And
so
it's something, it's a very personal one. Mm-hmm. In fact, when we were newly married, I think I think my mother-in-law gave it to my wife, mm-hmm. and she wanted to put it on the bed. And I took one look at it, and I said, this is too good.
Right, sure.
I said,
the art historian you took over, you know.
Right. I said, no, we don't want this faded.
Yeah.
And of course, we looked it up, and of course, we knew it was a wedding present to her grandmother in 1906.
Oh my goodness. Her grandmother.
Her grandmother in 1906,
wonderful.
And that's by a Mrs. Anna Williams, who was the wife of a federal judge there in the St. Louis area. Mm-hmm. And so no doubt she did it with companions and did this as a wedding present. Mm-hmm. But it was just in
and the double ring quilt is often given as a wedding present.
Yes, I'm led to believe, though, that the origin of the quilt, of the double ring, as many of the quilt designs, actually come from an African-American expression in the Carolinas.
Interesting.
So it's, in other words, an interesting cross, racial and whatnot, design elements.
Well, we'll have to do some research on that.
Right,
Take a look
exactly.
at that. Maybe we'll
right.
do another show about that. Now, before we leave, we have got to talk about this piece, this Adam and Eve, Temptation of Adam and Eve.
Right.
By Mr. Tolson.
Edgar Tolson.
Edgar
right.
Tolson.
Right. That's the prime piece of the show.
It's remarkable.
Right.
We have Adam and Eve, and we have a certain serpent. It was part of this.
Yeah,
tell us about what we're looking at.
It's Tolson's interpretation, of course, of the Book of Genesis story from the
And this is part of a cycle?
He did this whole series. I started off with a kind of a, not just with Adam and Eve and the temptation, but there's other things having to do with that other story in Genesis, and they're being chased out of the Garden of Eden. Okay. So there's kind of an angel there with a sword and whatnot. And then he kept adding. He kept on adding to it. So he has Cain killing Abel, and actually the Milwaukee Art Museum in their folk art, I think it's the Hall collection there at the museum in Milwaukee, has the whole series from that Adam and Eve cycle, and it's quite outstanding. So when John Kane allowed us to see his collection, and I saw the Tolson, I immediately thought, oh, we have to have this for the collection. Absolutely. We have to have this for the exhibition, rather.
Well, one of the things about the Tolson, I think, that's really instructive is it exhibits classic elements of folk art composition. In other words,
there's a naivete.
There's naivete. Right. There is the distortion of proportion. In other words, you've got the tree, which is just as tall as the figures. I mean, it's no taller than the figures. You know, and this idea that the important elements are larger. So you have that large serpent, and those are all elements that of not distortion, but approaches that folk artists often have.
Well, first of all, they're self-taught generally. I mean, certainly they're influenced by other carvers, but they're largely self-taught, and it's not just the naivete that gives it interest, but I think it does express a sculptural awareness that you just don't see in mainstream sculpture. Right. So, and you might say it has an extra something that makes it very special. Sure.
Well, there is a certain spiritual presence, you know, a commitment by the artist to the story that they are creating, as opposed to a formal arrangement of them. If you look at somebody like John Buck, who is a contemporary sculptor who does wood carving and is been heavily influenced by Edgar Tolson. You know, there's not the same sort of vibration or resonance there that you get with a Tolson.
Now, Tolson being from eastern Kentucky was kind of quite interesting because it was the Smithsonian that, well, it was under President Johnson, this kind of aid to Appalachia by looking for and promoting kind of indigenous arts in the area. And so he, in other words, that's how Tolson's work became famous. But he, prior to that, he simply was paying his bills by doing carvings for various people.
Really?
He was really kind of hand to mouth. He had a good number of children, by actually 2 families.
Oh my goodness!
And
did his wife know about that?
Well, he did spend. He was in prison briefly for, I think, for non-support of one family. So, a very colorful character, and then apparently a part-time preacher as well.
Okay.
So this.
He knew the stories really well.
Yes, yes. But I think in generally the biblical background of a lot of folk art, I mean, it kind of rises. So you do have, may not be the devotional image you get out of the Hispanic or the French area, but it's certainly an awareness of how close, you know, shall we say, biblical narrative is and how it relates to their whole
common
life.
experience.
Right.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we've looked at lots of wonderful, wonderful work. I thought we'd step back for a moment and take a look at a couple of pieces, just briefly from the kitchen. I happen to like pie, and we have some pie crimpers here.
Yes, right.
You know, what's interesting to me is the way that these handles are turned so very delicately, and then in some cases the wheel is hand carved, and then in other cases someone was able to go out and purchase, I'm presuming, a china or ceramic wheel to crimp the pie with.
They're almost like really pizza cutters. That's in contemporary reference.
Exactly, yeah. And they would sort of seal that edge of the pie. Obviously, you can do it with your fingers
yeah,
as well.
Well, that's the point. You could use your fingers, and you wonder, well, why did they use a pie crimper? Why this extra tool?
Exactly.
And well, I suppose they could do other things with it too. You could cut just pasta into various shapes. You could cut
cookies. Or
yes, right.
Like
so
that,
it probably was more utilitarian, and our name pie crimper is fairly just restricting it to one possible use. So, but some of them with the porcelain wheels and whatnot, they're very nice.
And then there were some, you know, when we were talking a little bit earlier again, you mentioned the glass objects that I was not aware. I mean, I didn't realize that some of these were hand blown and dated from colonial era period.
Right, yeah, especially the 2 examples from Jane and Peter's collection that are there with the scroll-like designs on it that are, again, almost, the value is way up there, almost $1,000 a bottle.
Okay.
But a number of the other ones were things that Dr. Jane Hudak had mentioned that they come from abandoned outhouses. She was out with someone actually digging in the ground and retrieved these bottles. There's some there from our collection as well. So you have a whole spread in terms of dates there of early colonial material and things that are really maybe up to the turn of the century.
And speaking of colonial work, I noticed that there's several what seem to be shaker rockers, or at least shaker chairs there with very straight backs. And of course the Shakers were very well known for their strict utilitarianism, and that's one of the things that provides such an incredible sort of modernity to their design, because you know, with the advent of Louis Sullivan and form follows function, you know, you've got this reiteration of that. So talk a little about that.
Well, again, the Shakers were almost were not supporters of art in the sense they thought they were trying to live artless for not only because of the simplicity of their lifestyle, but this idea of art seemed to denote a certain pride or self-pride, and they were trying to get away from that. And so this trying to design furnishings, and then of course there are boxes and even pie crimpers, by the way, that they would sometimes.
I'm not familiar with those.
Yeah, well, a whole range of other objects, but trying to do it in such a simple way of being away from high arts society. And yet in the very process of doing that, they create this kind of a minimal style of kind of less is more. And this is what we adulate their productions. But they were, of course, quite a separatist community. I mean, they were men and women, but in other words, not marrying and living apart and having special doors where they even
and there was no union of the men and women, and so consequently the Shaker group eventually
died out. But at one point they were quite numerous. So that's an interesting study itself of what drew people to that.
There's a wonderful Shaker community, I think, in Kentucky, or at least there used to be.
And in Ohio as well.
In Ohio as well, indeed. Well, thank you very much for coming in today. I really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm hoping that our viewers will have the opportunity to take a look and venture forth to Tallgrass Arts Association while the exhibition is ongoing. It will be there through November 28th. It's at 37 Artists Walk in Park Forest, Illinois. The website, if you want to get some more information, is www.tallgrassarts.org. And I want to thank you again for your viewing this show, and hope you'll come back and see some future examples of art out and about.